Okay, welcome everyone for our very first installment of Celebrating Malheur National Wildlife Refuge's speaker series. This is one of what we hope will be many events and programs we have this year throughout 2024 to celebrate the Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge turning 25. So welcome and thank you for coming, both to the people virtually and to the folks we have in the room here. Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is 187,000 acres situated inside the Great Basin, and we want to first acknowledge the history and the displacement of the Wadadaka Band of Northern Paiute and acknowledge their presence on the landscape and their relationship with the land still today. So thank you for taking just a second to acknowledge and recognize that. The Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge exists with a mission for Malheur. Our whole commitment is to promote the conservation and appreciation of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge's natural and cultural resources through education and outreach, advocacy, and stewardship. So everything that we do is in service to this mission, and we appreciate all of you for supporting that work. Together for Malheur, those of you that support this work include 941 members that are annual dues paying members. You keep your membership up to date by contributing annually, and we deeply appreciate your support. That also includes 1,401 donors. So these are folks that may be members, but also contribute annually or monthly to support our mission further. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of the people that make our work possible.
Thought maybe I could get it on here.
So I will just plug now, and I'll plug again at the end, that we are going to be doing these presentations every month. Starting this month with Travis Miller, the Refuge's Supervisory Ecologist. Next month, we are going to have Carla Burnside, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Cultural Resource Specialist. In March, we intend to have Teresa Wicks, Eastern Oregon biologist for Portland Audubon. And in April, Melissa Petschauer from High Desert Partnership. So we hope to see you not only this evening, but throughout the year. Our intention is to do these every month so that we can celebrate the refuge's history, their present, and our planning and our hopes for the future. With that, I'm going to turn it over to tonight's presenter, or this afternoon's presenter, Travis Miller, and hope that you all enjoy his presentation. A reminder to stay muted throughout the duration and to add your comments and questions to the chat box. I'll be moderating throughout the next 30-ish minutes of presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Maybe give a thumbs up in the chat just to make sure our audio is working properly. Are we seeing anything coming through?
Yep, looks good.
We're good? Okay, all right. Well, thanks, Janelle, for the introduction. And I just also want to thank Friends of Malheur for the support they give us. One of the things for us in the biology program is the intern that they provide for us in the summer for helping us with a lot of our efforts during the spring and summer data collections and management actions we take. So just a thank you for that. So that support is really benefits us, and we're very grateful for that. As Janelle introduced, I'm the supervisory ecologist for Malheur Refuge. I supervise the biology program. I have two other biologists that I work directly with. Dominic Bachman, he's for our aquatics, and then Alexa Martinez for our wildlife part. And so we work as a team to tackle a lot of the things that are going on in the refuge. As Janelle said, we're 187,000 acres. It's a big area, as you can see here on this map that I have here before you. This just breaks out the refuge into the different management units we have. And those management units, there's a lot going on in them, besides just habitat. As Janelle mentioned, as far as the local Paiute tribe, we have a lot of archaeological stuff going on. So really, I'm going to be focusing on is the biology aspect and the habitat, and then even that zeroing out a few things, because it's really quite large in scale, and there's only so much time I have to present, and I don't want to get down too many rabbit holes because that does happen. Just here with the picture of my selfie. This is me standing in some beautiful hybrid cattail. I was out there on the north end of Unit 5 doing some work late summer, and was sending a picture to some folks saying that had brought this to my attention 2 years ago, saying, it was a hot day and I needed some shade and was ready for lunch. And anyways, maybe one of the few benefits that we get from that species, but this one we're going to talk a little bit more about. So with that, here at our next slide, I kind of want to get a little bit, before I dive too much into the Malheur Refuge challenger issues, is the strategic approach that Refuge Fish and Wildlife Service is using to help us kind of provide guidance in the challenges we're facing with ecosystem, these transforming ecosystems, invasives, climate change. And it's this resist, accept, direct, or we call RAD. This was a new concept to me as I joined here a little more than a little over a year and a half now, approaching 2 years. And a lot of the concepts are similar to a lot of the things that I would say I've experienced in my previous career at the BLM, but really this kind of, I think, puts it together nicely in a way that can be communicated and help us communicate and strategize what our plans are and our management strategies. The one resist, just to kind of give you a quick overview, this is really a whole nother presentation in its own, so I'm going to be pretty broad on this, but they kind of interlock with each other with the resist, accept, direct. But resist, the way I kind of look at it, is an area that we want to protect, something that hasn't yet degraded. It's desirable. It's a habitat that we like. I think of a lot of the meadow habitats we'll be talking about on the south end of the refuge near French Glen and P Ranch. Though, we think of those as areas we want to resist change. We want to resist invasion by exotics, any of those other things. We want to try to keep those protected and maintained. The concept of accept, the way I kind of look at it, is that things are changing, and things that may be out of our control, such as climate change, things that have been changing in the past, currently, and what we project into the future. Those are possible things that we may not be able to have any controls of. But also we have other things like invasive plants that we're dealing with, and other invasive species that can create certain threshold changes that we may not be able to return back to.
As a point of interest, people may be interested in knowing that the Harney County Opportunity Team's technology upgrades to the community room here at the chamber office in downtown Burns was a big project that was undertaken in response to the pandemic. And it made hybrid meetings like this possible, that could be in person and virtual. And it is our first time really testing out and trying this technology. So we appreciate you all being a part of it. And you're up.
How about now?
You're up.
Are we good? Can you hear me? Okay, and you guys can see where we're at. All right. Good? Okay. All right. Sorry, folks, for that. So back at this. Okay, so I was talking about the accept, certain conditions, thresholds crossed, things that may not be reversible, this concept of the RAD. We talked about the resist. And then the next one's direct. Now, this might be something where we're looking at something that's in a transition or changing, maybe something that has changed that's not desirable, but is there certain ways, actions that we could take that would make that habitat more structurally, functionally, and also the processes meeting our objectives, and something that would be more desirable that species could utilize versus what is currently happening or where it's heading. And so I just kind of want to get this kind of concept, the idea of when we're trying to prioritize, we're trying to do certain projects or make or propose certain actions on the situations that we're dealing with on the refuge. And then just as for many people that have been in land management and have been involved in projects in restoration and rehab, solutions are difficult. Some work well, some Some have a certain level of uncertainty for I would say all of those. You have some that work great, some that sometimes you have kind of a moderate result, and some that we have basically a poor result in those treatments. And we know there's a lot of cost, and often these aren't permanent. You know, a lot of the management actions we're doing, things like that, may not be permanent. It may require monitoring and also retreatment. So now I'm going to get into our habitat types that are identified in our CCP. And these also in chapter 4 talks about the goals that we have and objectives for these habitats, for the species that we manage for. And really looking at really trying to provide that suitable wildlife habitat for the suite of species that we have. And we have that broken out into the lacustrine, which is the lake system, which is really units that would be kind of mud lake and Malheur Lake. Although unit 5 is the one that I would say on a regular basis has water, where a lot of the others, especially in these these drought years, tend to be dry. The riverine system is the Donner and Blitzen is our primary one, but we do have tributaries. We do have some other like Bridge Creek, Mud Creek. This would support a lot of our wildlife like red band. One of the species coming up that we're hearing a lot about is the Western Ridge mussel, woody riparian. This is both riverine, but it follows a lot of our irrigation system, our canals, and our ditches. And then we have the postrine emergent and open water emergent. This is a pretty large component in our management. This is the areas that we actively manage with our flood irrigation. So this would be the 00 system, and which is unit 1, and then units 7 through 12, basically Sawhouse south to the P Ranch. This is broken up into 3 groups. We have the flooded wet meadow, which is really the meadow habitats. And within that, in the CCP, we have wet meadow and then dry meadow, but we've included a 3rd one recently, which is mesic. And that really is broken up based on slight changes in elevation in the meadow or in that field that can make the separation or that split between the different suite of species that make those meadow habitats up. Seasonally flooded marsh. The emergent, has emergent vegetation, things such as our cattail, our bulrush, our burrweed. So this is an important component for our habitat. And then semi-permanently flooded wet impoundments. Again, emergent vegetation, but also submergent vegetation as well, SAV, that we manage for. And so these 3 really are basically kind of interlocked with each other in our management actions. Again, this is directly correlated with our infrastructure for irrigation. And then some of the other habitats we have are salt desert scrub, sagebrush lowland, which would be down a lot of in our floodplain area that are elevated sites, sagebrush steppe, a lot of our toe slopes around the perimeter, dune, playa saline, which would be Harney and Stinking Lake are good examples of that, and then cliffs, rimrock, and lava flows. And just the pictures here, the one in the upper right is early this summer, looking at some of the emergent veg coming up that was reestablishing out there, and the Steens there in the background. I'm not going to speak any more of that today. I believe Dominic may be doing some presenting on that in the future. And then there's the lower picture shows irrigation occurring in some of our meadow habitat. So the second component that the biology program's tasked with is a lot of our monitoring and looking at understanding the conditions of our habitat, also looking at our management and how management is either is influencing habitat response, but also looking at wildlife and how wildlife respond to that. It's important for us to understand is, as far as how our wildlife responding either favorably, maybe neutral or negatively to what's going on in the refuge as far as habitat and management go. The inventory and monitoring plan that we work with has quite a suite of different surveys that we're supposed to be that we be implementing on the refuge on a year-to-year basis, or certain other longer scale intervals of maybe a couple of years in between. And those are wildlife surveys is a common one. Habitat condition is a big one. It's a real challenging one to capture for many of those that have run transects through vegetation or habitat. It's always difficult to understand that spatial and temporal scale in relation to wildlife behavior and use. And then also trying to capture threats. A lot of our invasive species across the refuge, what's their distribution, what's their footprint, And then other things that we monitor along as well as things like, the climate change that's occurred in the past, current, and projected future, and how do we try to link those together in understanding what's going on, which then leads to our management actions. If we're doing any kind of rehabilitation or restoration projects, any of our chemical treatments, predominantly herbicide on invasive plants, mechanical, anything I threw in irrigation, because a lot of our irrigation has been developed with infrastructure and pushing water to different areas across the refuge. And our hay and rake bunch graze is another example of that, of doing a mowing treatment on our meadow habitats. Biological is one that we really haven't implemented much, to my knowledge. I think there's been some efforts in the past, but looking at like livestock use on certain invasive plants, reed canary grass would be an example of that. And then, of course, effectiveness of our infrastructure. This is a challenge that we face, is what's the condition of that in order to have efficient management of our water across the refuge. So first, I want to kind of get into a little bit of our scale, looking at some of the surveys, looking at trying to determine what our habitats are doing. This is bringing in two layers. The land bird counts is something that we've been doing for a number of years now, and trying to understand and looking at bird species in these areas. It's mostly done in the southern part of the refuge in Unit 12, but we are incorporating other monitoring of birds across the refuge. And Teresa, I believe, will be talking more to that in the near future. And this is overlaid with a habitat or a weed map that we've developed in the last year. And we're actually going to be expanding this map with some more work we did this last summer, and then incorporating this and hopefully creating some relationships with bird response or other wildlife response. And so this is helping us capture that spatial and temporal scale. With this weed map, we're working with Open Range Consulting, and this is a high resolution imagery that is then related to certain photos on different habitat types or species that we're targeting, such as like reed canary grass. And then we're able to develop a map, or I should say ORC makes the map. I just get to look at it and play with it and do analysis off of it, and be able to start looking at hopefully relationships in time, as far as past management and change with invasives to our current, and hopefully into the future. But here you can see, this is just an example. Just recently I've worked on this. This is 2 points, 15 and 16, with a 200-meter buffer, which is approximately 30 acres in size. And you can see, the different habitat or invasive plants that are within those that could potentially be influencing bird use, presence, absence of different species. And the little table I have below just kind of shows you a breakdown of the acres of what is represented there. Your cattail, reed canary grass, pepperweed, rush, upland. Shadow is predominantly waterways or impoundments, and then meadow, which is the main one that we're really managing for a lot of this system. And so 16, you can see, has a lot of good meadow habitat with some of the invasives coming in, such as pepperweed and reed canary grass, whereas 15 has quite a bit of the reed canary grass moving in, which most likely would have been wet meadow habitat type, and the remaining meadow habitat is probably mesic and dry. So you can kind of see what's going on there, and potentially bird response, such as the common yellowthroat may prefer some of that change, like with the cattail, things like that, where that structure may benefit a species like that, whereas the meadowlark may be looking at more of the intact, fuller size meadow scenario. Habitat management has a lot to do with the infrastructure we have. This is at Grain Camp. This is the beginning of the BV Canal, or Buena Vista Canal. It's a large canal. We tried measuring this. We weren't able to, because it was too much water. We couldn't weight it. It's massive. So some challenges there, but irrigation has a lot to do with the response of what's going on with our habitat, also our wildlife. The infrastructure is important. If it's in poor condition, which a lot of it we're finding is, it really reduces our efficiency in moving water. And that can either be too little or too much, because sometimes we have to water more areas more in order to push it to other areas. And that can lead to some challenges with plant assemblages. Certain species will benefit more from that, and we find a lot of our invasives are the ones that are benefiting from these challenges with our water management. So getting into water management practices is another part. It's not only just infrastructure, but really, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to not only move water across, but how long? The timing, the duration and frequency of which we water. There's some concerns that some of the practices we're currently implementing may be favoring species that are less desirable on the refuge and increasing their expansion. So we really have to start trying to understand how we're going to manage water in through time. We can have some year to year and short-term benefits from that, but what are the long-term also changes that are occurring? And then that also influences our treatments. So if we're trying to do, say, herbicide treatments and we can't access those plants during phenological stages that they're more vulnerable, then it makes it really difficult as well to get to these species. And we'll talk some more about that. We'll talk about the invasive species here. We have quite a list of them. I'm not sure if this is all of them, but these are a lot of the big players. I'm not going to talk in depth on many of these. The four that are bold are the ones that I'm going to spend more time on in this presentation, but just, many of you have heard about the common carp. It's been something that's been, the Refuge has been dealing with and working with for some time now. And 2 falls ago, Dominic put together a team and we put, what was it? I think 3 weeks of effort killing carp. It was quite the workload, but we had a lot of success. A lot of carp were removed. We obviously didn't eradicate them. I wish we could say so, but they'll be working their way back. But it's given us an opportunity, I think, and some positive results. But I'm not going to talk any more to that on this. Plants is the main one I'll focus on. We have upland. Our upland habitats have medusa-head cheatgrass, knapweed. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. If you're not, the medusa-head cheatgrass are invasive annual grasses, and a knapweed is a forb. In our other habitats where we're irrigating in the meadows, like the palustrine, and also the lakes, which is the lacustrine, we have a suite of species. The smooth brome is one that has just been identified. It's been on the refuge for probably a few decades, but it's always been held in check, it seems like, for whatever reason, in the right around Page Springs Dam. And it really has never expanded until just within the last decade or less. So big concern there of what that's doing. Perennial pepperweed, many of you know what that one probably is. It's been around for a number of decades and provides some challenges in habitat management. Reed canary grass. This one's a big one. This is one that we'll talk some more here again about, but it's pretty widespread across the refuge. And then hybrid cattail is one that's really new to me. Didn't really know it existed until really last summer, 2 summers ago when I first started. And it's something that is definitely raised some high level of concern on the refuge. Phragmites, the picture here that you see in the lower part is the SWAT. Jamie came out with me and I drug her down the diamond drain, the diamond canal there to treat some Phragmites. It's one that's been on the refuge in the past, but it's really expanding. So we're really trying to get after it now. Salt cedar is one we treated 2 summers ago. Eurasian milfoil is one that's in the water systems like the Blitzen, and then also the Unit 5 on the lake is a big concern for us that we just picked up this summer that we have found. So some concerns there, but I'm going to focus on these 4. These are the ones that I was tasked with when I started to try to map and determine their distribution on the refuge. And so I'm going to spend more time on those today. Before I get to those, I just want to give you a quick concept. I've talked a lot about transition, threshold, suitable versus kind of marginal to unsuitable. And so that kind of gets us into this concept of state and transition model and how these invasives play this role in here. They basically, what happens is you have utilizing a threat-based model that I used in the sagebrush steppe when I was with the BLM was Johnson et al. 2019. Really gives us a good strategy to try to communicate, show, quantify, and do analysis in a way that shows these changes that are occurring. And by focusing on the threats, such as the invasives themselves, really helps kind of give us a way to, I think, target and zoom in on what's going on. And we can start looking at trends. We can start looking at trajectory. we can start quantifying what condition the habitat's in, and then help us, develop research monitoring and then also management actions. Here you can see the different meadow types, the dry, mesic, and the wet, and then the transitions that those go into here, as they transition into these invasives and then completely turn into the invasives. So we have, here in the dry meadow, we have the pepperweed, but we really have also the smooth brome we'll be putting in there as a more stronger component. The wet and the mesic, those are really reed canary grass, but really the cattail, the hybrid cattail will now really fit into the wet meadow as it encroaches into those habitats. And so hopefully this kind of gives you a picture of an idea when I talk about in these invasives and how we're transitioning from a desirable state to an undesirable state. So let's kick it off with these 4 invasives. So smooth brome, Bromus intermis. This one again, 2 summers ago, our East Side zone biologist, Adonia Henry, brought up, say, do you have a smooth brome issue or concern on the refuge? And it was like, I don't think so. And 2 summers ago, as we were doing the mapping for the open range consulting for the invasives, started finding a lot of smooth brome. Last summer, even more so. So we've really made this as one of our priority species as a habitat threat. It really goes after our dry meadow and into our mesic meadows. These are key habitats for like our bobolink, which is one of our focal species for these habitats. It creates a monoculture that knocks out a lot of our important forbs and other desirable grasses and sedges and rushes. So not only would it, impact the bobolink, but this also impacts things like our flora, as far as the forbs, but also pollinators. Pollinators are real important species, not only for that diverse in species richness, but also for species that are feeding on them, like the bobolink. Causal factors, there's a number of things here. Obviously, seed dispersal is one of the things. We have waterways, roads, and levees. We find a lot of it in these zones. We find it mechanical, I'm sure, where we are moving through and where seed is getting on machinery. This includes our work, tourist recreational activities. This species is pretty common along the East Canal and sections of our roads. It's coming in cultivated areas. This photo in the upper right is a cultivated area near Sod House. Really has moved in strong there. Some of the other knowns is why it has maybe seems to have a competitive advantage. I put here with some question marks because, like I said, in the last decade, it's moving into areas that aren't just disturbed, but areas that are what I would consider intact, resistant, resilient. Really, where you have a really great component, suite of flora species, and it's really coming in and pushing into those. So not sure what mechanisms may giving it a competitive advantage, but it kind of threw in some that I know, like elevated atmospheric CO2 has been brought up. I've heard brought up as giving a competitive advantage for a number of species. And then we have no phenological stressors on this. Our treatments, the timing of when we're getting in to try to treat certain plants is we're really giving it free range. So we got to figure out how to start putting stressors on it to reduce its spread. Perennial pepperweed's been around for a bit. It overlaps a lot with the smooth brome as far as the habitat types, but we also find it in our sagebrush lowland. We see it in our salt desert scrub. I probably should take the question mark O. It's readily invaded a lot of areas that have saltgrass. So this is another one of concern in the manner of where it takes. The lower right photo shows an area this last fall of perennial pepperweed on a belt in that transition of kind of your mesic wet meadow to dry meadow into your sagebrush lowland, which is really important nesting habitat for things like cinnamon teal, mallards, and looking for that zone, that belt for nesting, as you can see here in the picture. And those, so it's a threat to that habitat type, for that life cycle for those species. And this area, we've had someone treat before, but I believe the treatments are too late. And what happens is with the timing is we're not hitting it when it's most vulnerable phenologically. And so some of the, it has really good, seems to have good seed dispersal, similar mechanisms as like smooth brome. But I do believe, I think also wildlife is able to transport that to an extent as well. So this is a species that we've been trying to manage for a while now. At this time, it's pretty widespread though, and we have a lot of catch up to do. Reed canary grass. I would say reed canary grass at this time probably occupies the largest footprint on the refuge. as far as acres go. It's dominating some areas, especially like Unit 11. Unit 9, I believe, is another one. And it's really widespread throughout the refuge, and it's moving. 00 supposedly didn't have reed canary grass, but in our mapping effort, it's there. It's one that it likes our wet and mesic meadows, especially the wet meadows. It seems to take over first, as far as, well, I would say really our riverine and waterways first, and then the wet meadows, and now it's moving into our mesic meadows. We do find it in some of our seasonally flooded marshes where we don't have dominant of cattail or bulrush. But anyways, this one really has quite a light extinction. Tony Svekar is one that brings that up. This idea of pushing out any kind of available light in the understory and really kind of eliminating a lot of our desirable plant species in these habitats. And so as you can see in the map here, in our OSC map, you can really see here in this West Swamp Field in Unit 11, the extent of the reed canary grass. And some of the concerns we have there, of course, like a focal species of the sandhill crane and colt rearing in these habitats are pretty important in these meadow types, and makes it pretty difficult to raise a colt in something in a sea of reed canary grass that's 5 to 6 feet tall. This one really likes our irrigation management. Longer hydro periods, extended, lots of water. It really responds favorably to that. So that's some of the things we really have to start wrestling with, is how do we try to reduce that management aspect that's benefiting reed canary grass. And so there's some challenges there. And again, we're giving it free rein. There's no phenological stressors during the times it's most vulnerable. So we really got to start looking about how do we try to look at certain management practices in addressing that. Because we don't want to see this amount of reed canary grass across the refuge. And the last one I'm going to focus on today is hybrid cattail. This one here, again, didn't really know much about it. That's on the first slide I had with a picture of my selfie, and must be messed up in the head a little bit when you start taking selfies with yourself in hybrid or invasive plants. But once you start seeing invasive plants, you see them everywhere. And so this one, the research I've been doing on this one and people I've talked to, Midwest along the Columbia River system, is a really concern as far as it seems they're saying it creates quite a barrier for a lot of habitat types as far as wildlife passage and fish passage both. It has a very high stem density, very tall stature, and we're not really sure exactly what kind of impacts it's having on our wildlife, but we do have it as quite a concern. It's moving into our wet meadows. Permittees are talking about mowing it in certain fields, and this cattail seems to just rebound as though we're not doing anything. Now that I've been out looking at those areas, that's hybrid cattail, been able to identify that. It likes our seasonally flooded marsh, our semi-permanently flooded wetlands, our riverine and waterways. And now our question is the lakes, like where I was at on the north end of Unit 5, and on the south end of Unit 5, where the Blitzen River comes in to the lake, and potentially on a lake itself. So one of the things we're not sure, we'll find out, I think, here in the future, but kind of the characteristics here with the upper picture with my hand, that's a key characteristic of the inflorescence, the flowering part, where the female in the lower section, which is kind of the little hot dog there, and then you have a little gap on the stem there before you get into the male flowering part. It's about 1/4 inch in size, whereas the native common broadleaf cattail, there is no gap. And then the invasive exotic, which is narrowleaf cattail, has about a 1/2 to 1 inch gap. So that's kind of a way to know what you're seeing. One of the other things that makes it stand out is its stature. It's so big. As you can see here, I'm wading in the diamond drain as we were treating Phragmites. And this stuff is growing right at my feet. I'm standing right alongside it. This stuff is 10, 12 plus feet tall. It's massive. So it's quite a bit larger in stature than both the native and the exotic cattail. And it's just a result of a hybridization between the two, for those of you that are new to this species. And it's pretty impressive. Right here, I think this was the area, but it might have been one other. When I was walking along dragging the boat through this stuff, walking along, there was a bird that was fluttering in there, and I wasn't sure what it was. And as I approached it, it was trapped, and looking back at now, I believe it was a Sora juvenile. And as I came to it, leg was trapped in the between where the leaves come together along the stem of the cattail, and its leg was all tore up and pulled out of joint. And I kind of wish I'd taken a picture, because then maybe I could have shown something about how cattail predates birds, I guess. That might be an exaggeration, but it was an interesting situation there. And as they talk about how dense it gets, we're not sure what kind of impacts it could have on species like Sora and others, is not being favorable habitat. It might be more structure than you want, I guess you could say. So irrigation management, it's a problem. It loves lots of water. And if we, in the picture in the lower right and the lower left is out in our meadow habitats. This is an area it's taking over, wet meadow. This is not seasonally flooded marsh. This is wet meadow habitat that was once described to me as good wet and music meadow habitat, no longer, and that is now hybrid cattail. And so one of the things we got to think about is more water means more hybrid cattail. And so our hydro period is another challenge we have to face with that. And again, stressors. One of the things I'm hopeful for, we have some work to do on that, is I've been looking into, one of the permittees came up to me and told me about using drones for spraying weeds in agriculture. And so one of the things we're looking at is if we can start to figure out how we can get a drone that would be large enough that could do treatments. And then we could have like surgical ways of going in and treating stuff like this. Because one, access is pretty much impossible, as you can see me standing in there. And then two, you're not going to be able to drive over the stuff. It's so large. So you're really looking at an aerial treatment for this. So I'll try to close up here, but just in closing, talked about, how it's important that we try to identify the spatial and temporal scale of these threats in our habitat. Looking at the acres, the distribution, looking at trajectory, what's our trend on these, looking at linking it with our wildlife in response. How are they responding to these invasives as they increase? Trying to prioritize what invasives we're going to tackle. Which ones are the ones that we think are going to have the biggest negative impacts on wildlife habitat and also population and species response. We're also looking at, we got to adapt, to change. The RAD is a way of trying to help us focus on that. How are we going to manage? What are our management actions and treatments? Are they going to be the same as past, or do we need to change certain ones? Are there new tools to use, new technologies that we can help us address some of these threats? And some of our management practices. There's certain things that may have worked in the past that maybe we need to change, alter, adjust today and into the future. And those are all questions that we're going to be looking to answer, hopefully, as we move along. And I'm pretty optimistic. Some of these are pretty daunting. Sometimes I just want to cover my eyes and pretend I don't see all this stuff. But I think we have a great crew on the Refuge. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy, and I really hope, and we have good support and partners. So yeah, the challenges are big. These are just some examples of those, but we're gonna tackle those and do our best to continue to manage Malheur Refuge as a wonderful place for our wildlife and a great place for people to visit. And hopefully I didn't go too long. I know it's a lot, but a little nice red band trout my daughter caught a couple of years ago along the Blitzen River. And if there's any questions or discussions, I don't know, Janelle, I guess I'll let you sort of maybe moderate that and help me out with that. And
yes.
We'll
Yeah, I'd be glad to handle that. I'm going to open it up first to anyone in the room that has a question. And there are some questions in the chat. So we want to not monopolize Travis's time just in the room. We want to kind of go back and forth. Does anyone in the room have a question for Travis? Lori?
I'm a late comer, so I probably need to address this, but how much is fire being used?
And I want to repeat the question so that the people in Zoom make sure that they can hear it too.
Yeah.
So the question that was posed is just how much is fire being used to assist in management of habitat on the Refuge?
Yeah, so fire has been used both to a benefit, and we have some concerns of some negative effects on that. So we're still using fire, but we're really going to try to make it more surgical now than we have in the past. We really want to target emergent vegetation, especially like the hybrid cattail or other cattail bulrush in our management. and do more focused targeted burning on those. It makes it a little more difficult, but I've been working with our fuels and fire specialists out there at the refuge, and we're excited to continue to use fire, but try to be maybe a little more, like I said, surgical in how we do that.
So the hybrid cattail responds well to fire? I mean,
Well, basically, most herbaceous plants respond well to fire typically. And so what we'd look at doing with hybrid cattail is we're looking at using some herbicide treatments first, and then coming in follow up with burning. And especially in and around our impoundments is a big target area for that. So yes, we are still using fire, and we will continue to use fire.
Great. So in the chat, we have 2 questions. I'll start with the first one. What part are the cows and the hay playing in seed disbursement of the undesirables? You didn't mention juniper as an invasive. Do you list them as such? So those are there are multiple questions in this comment. We'll just stop with that for
Okay.
now.
All right. So I'll start off with the hay and rake bunch graze that we do on the refuge. First off, the purpose of the tool is to treat the standing biomass on the meadows. And in order to do so, and what that does is that conditions for spring migration, and also rejuvenates production of our forbs and grasses for nesting and brood rearing in the following growing season. As far as seed dispersal goes, yeah, there's always the certain risks as far as utilizing that. If treatments were occurring earlier, which is something that's a challenge because our treatments don't start until after August 10th. We're going in there when either seed drop is occurring or is still on the plants. And that's the same thing with even our activities. So those are certain things. We have certain special operating procedures for them to minimize that. But it's anytime you're in amongst invasives, you're always going to have the chance of seed dispersal. Reed canary grass is most likely very small seed. A lot of times it's already in seed drop when treatment occurs. So most likely not. That's mostly waterways and movement. The smooth brome, I believe, is kind of a similar scenario. Perennial pepperweed, a lot of times the seed is still on the plant. A lot of times they try to avoid mowing those sites because it's not as desirable. The rake bunch graze fields, which makes up, I was trying to remember the number of fields. Not all fields are rake bunch grazed. I think about 60% of the fields that we manage in this manner are rake bunch grazed. And so when cows are utilizing the rake bunch piles is what they're doing. The rumen's pretty effective at digesting seed. The only seed that would really be on most of that there would be some reed canary grass seed. There would be some pepperweed seed, things like that. The cattail is wind distributed, so cattail's not a part of that. The smooth brome could be. So just certain things. The smooth brome's in some of our rake bunch, but it's mostly in our hay fields that we have it right now. So mostly where we're just doing a mowing treatment only and no winter grazing, winter use. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, I think that answers that question. Small follow-up to that same theme is just what can we, and I suppose the visitors and supporters of the refuge, can do to educate other visitors to stop the spread of seeds from just driving around, or is that not a concern?
It is a concern. We try to do treatments, especially on the forbs, like the pepperweed. I didn't mention Canada thistle, but that's another invasive we have. Those we try to do treatments along our roadways, our levee ways, but it's still there. And it's still a risk, but there's a lot of these species that are getting moved interior. We have a lot of these invasives in areas we don't even touch with cattle or with mowing. So there's a lot of seed distribution occurring besides just those mechanisms. When you have water flowing across this system, and the different irrigation structures we have, you have water flowing across these meadows and throughout. I mean, you're carrying seed there as well. I think a lot of the smooth brome that we've seen in the last decade or less is probably been, part of that could have been instigated by some of our high flow events that's occurred in 17, 19, and even possibly this last year. And because it's not really associated with the wet meadows. So it's coming in areas when we probably have these higher float events where it's reaching the dry meadows and then carrying that seed in there. It's a very light seed, kind of like a little boat. I think it'd be probably very portable through water movement. So that's a challenge too. So when you have water moving from Page Springs all the way to the north end of the refuge.
Right. So I'm gonna make space again in the room for anyone that might have a question here
There
in
was
person.
the juniper question.
Oh, yeah, juniper.
So
Does the refuge consider juniper an invasive species?
So juniper, I worked for the BLM, and juniper I considered an encroaching species. It's a native. So I don't really call it invasive. There's a lot of argument back, but I say it's encroaches. It has advantages. We have a little bit on the refuge. There's been a few small treatments done on the refuge, but I wouldn't really consider it a threat in comparison to these other species at all.
Great.
So
Thank you for that. In the room, anyone?
What would you, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what would you consider the biggest threat?
as far as which specific, I guess, want to give me a category? Would you
The
want
biggest threat to
as far as
successful habitat on the refuge, or?
Of the four vegetation.
of the four? So the question is, what would I consider the greatest or biggest threat between the four that we talked mostly about? Oh, wow. At this time, I would say at our current, what we could say at the current footprint would be reed canary grass. However, the hybrid cattail, based on what I've been learning about it and what I've seen in the last year, is really heightened that. I would say it's really bumped that one up. And seeing it pushed into the reed canary grass and being put and it's moving into our wet meadows and our music, that one's definitely being more and more elevated. But they all have different, like the smooth brome one example on the smooth brome, that's where it's really expanded, is the island field just north of P Ranch. And we didn't realize how extensive that one was, but that's called bobolink alley. And we've heard that there's been some fewer sightings of bobolinks there. And we were in there this last summer looking at that. And the smooth brome has taken over like half of that lower half of that field. And it's pretty extensive. So there's, that's definitely a heightened, but it fills a certain niche. It doesn't impact all habitats. I'd say the hybrid cattail probably has a broader sweep of habitats that it's potentially a threat to. And so that would be one that I'd definitely, I don't know. It's like pick which one.
Yeah,
Which one's
it's
your
hard.
favorite?
It's a mosaic of problems, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so another question here in the chat is from Jennifer. She asks, is it hard to find treatments that don't negatively affect birds and other critters?
A lot of it has to do, of course, timing, right? And when you're talking about whether it's chemical, mechanical, biological, as far as, and we'll throw the cattle in that, because that's one of the few that we have available to us, for example, as a potential option, like say targeting monocultures of reed canary grass that the CCP identifies as a potential tool. Chemical is one concern, of course, some of our pollinators. Unfortunately, some of our forbs produce great nectar and pollen sources. Canna thistle is an example of that. Pollinators love that. So we've had some discussions about how that can be a challenge in, treatment that we may have with herbicide use. There is no silver bullet on any of these. There is no, I'd say, perfect solution. And timing is critical. If you're really going to address any of these invasives, you've got to hit them at a time that they're most vulnerable. Unfortunately, a lot of times that's still going to overlap with wildlife use. So you're trying to mitigate that. So for example, I guess, would it be, say, if we did try to target reed canary grass and we were concerned about nests, we would want to try to avoid the nesting season, put the cows in there during a time when nests are no longer, when, they're raising chicks and things like that, and target reed canary grass at that time. Would you have some overlap? Possibly. Would you have some potential impacts? Possibly. Question is what are the impacts of these invasives are having if we do nothing? That scale of impact may be much larger than any of the treatment effects we would have on any of our wildlife species. Treatment effect that may harm a few versus no action could affect a much larger scale of suite of our species.
I think that's such an important point. We'll do one last question and then a short wrap up. So I hope those of you that are still with us will stick around for just a couple more minutes. But Ken has asked, what science partners are you working with to help build understanding on how to address the invasives and refine stage and transition understanding?
Yeah. So as far as partners go, we work with the High Desert Partnership. Well, they're kind of more of a partner, but the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center has been a big part of assisting in a lot of our as far as studies, and continue to look at using them. Some of the things that I'm working with them right now and did some discussions is looking at virtual fence, where you use the virtual fence on cattle in a way that you can have better control and use, say in more of a surgical targeted grazing strategy, and say like a reed canary grass field that may have still some areas of concern. We can use that to break a field up, like the West Swamp that was shown in the reed canary grass monoculture there, where we can even break it up into multiple pastures. But so, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's important that we capture at best we can any of the treatments we do and what kind of success or even failure that we may experience with that. So we understand, what kind of results we're getting. And so, yeah, the science aspect, the survey, the monitoring, the inventory really all kind of come together in a lot of what we do. And so we really want to make sure we capture that. And it's hard because we're also land managers too. And so if we get too caught up into all of that and forget to do the part of the management, then we can measure stuff all we want. But if we're not actually taking action, then we get to just watch stuff go where it's going. So it's a balance that we have as land managers, and it's tough. And that's a tough thing because there's times that we got to do stuff and we may not be able to fully capture what kind of effects we have. I'm really trying to get High Desert Partnership to help me with more monitoring our invasive weed treatments. We don't really have a lot of data on our success. So like we've been doing weed treatments, but to what result? Like what kind of results have we had on that? And it doesn't look like there's a lot of results. So we need to start understanding that better.
That's great. I think that's a really great place to leave it. Want to just express our deep gratitude for Travis coming and speaking with us this afternoon and sharing all his knowledge about these challenges that the refuge is facing. We're going to hear throughout the year during these presentations on a lot of different topics, and we hope that we're able to build connections for folks like all of you that are tuning in and bring it back once in a while to different topics and build our understanding of what's happening on the ground on the refuge. So thank you so much, Travis, for getting us started and kicking off the new year with these presentations. With that, yeah, thank you. I want to remind everyone again, our goal is to do this monthly. So February is going to be the prehistory and history of Malheur Refuge with Carla Burnside. This is a fantastic presentation. She's given it for the Friends in the past, and she always has really wonderful information to share about the background of the region and the refuge. We are hosting these for free in person and virtually. We would love to invite people that are attending to make an optional donation of $10 per person. More if you think that the value is that much. We really appreciate your support to helping make this work happen. If you want to get a hold of the Friends, our website is malheurfriends.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Malheur Friends. You can always drop us a note or a letter. It's our mailing address, which is also on the bottom of our website. And you can always call us at the Nature Store at Refuge Headquarters. The number is 541-493-4230. I am Janelle Wicks, Friends of Malheur's Executive Director, and excited to be celebrating our 25th anniversary with all of you this year. Thank you so much for coming out.
Friends.